So welcome everybody. This is
I cannot hear you, Tony.
You cannot hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
so I cannot.
Okay.
I know.
No.
And Agustino doesn't hear you.
Oh no. Okay, now it works. It works.
It works. Okay, so we are going to start. Let me say welcome everybody. I hope we will not going to have technical problems. I'm Antonio Villafranca. I'm the research coordinator at the Italian Institute for International Political Studies. Today's event is organized by our desk on our program on global cities, which is promoted in cooperation with Euro Milano. We picked a very precise title today, which is COVID-19 and Global Cities, where the battle can be fought. Because we hear a lot of commentators and experts saying that we are going through a war, the war against the coronavirus. And as it is with any war, there are major battlefields. And in a way, global cities are the major battlefields. They are the places where ultimately the battle, the war can be won or can be lost. So this is what we are going to do today with this event. We will focus on the answers which can be provided at the city level, but we will also try to understand what the city can do in order to foster, to enhance international cooperation in a context in which we see inward-looking policies emerging at the state level. So it is also interesting to see what city-to-city cooperation can do, especially in the post-COVID scenario. So let me remind you very quickly what is our format. We will have a very brief presentation, 5 to 7 minutes for each speaker, so we can leave room for a Q&A session. So I invite you all to submit your question by using the social media or by sending an email to us. But without further ado, I leave the virtual floor to Luigi Borré, President of Euro Milano. Please, Luigi.
Thank you, Antonio. It's a pleasure and an honor to open this roundtable with such prominent international panelists. This is one of the outcomes of the partnership between Euro Milano and the ISPI. ISPI doesn't need any further presentation. It's one of the most prestigious cultural institutions in Italy. Euro Milano is a real estate development company focused on the regeneration of urban areas. The company has a strong focus on conceiving and implementing sustainable districts and buildings. Okay, let me introduce the roundtable with a few statements. When we think about cities, we have always to consider that the temporal perspective is not made of days or months or years, but is rather made of tens of years or centuries. This is why even when we concentrate on the COVID-19 emergency, the impacts on the cities must be considered in a perspective when the emergency is already overcome, we hope. It's crucial not to be biased, in my opinion, it's crucial not to be biased by the urgency of the emergency. In this perspective, it seems to me that there are some key questions that are, the first one, how the pandemic experience is going to change our lives in a permanent way after the emergency, I mean. And secondly, how can cities meet this new permanent people needs? And finally, what are the permanent lessons we have learned from the COVID-19 dramatic experience? These last few weeks, some possible answers to the challenges provided by the COVID-19 have been drafted. Some have forecasted an escape of people from big cities, from global cities, in search for smaller cities or villages, or sometimes for more isolated sites. This perspective pushes towards an horizontal direction that is absolutely opposite to the vertical perspective we have experienced in the development of big cities of the last decades. Another conceived option is the reorganization of city districts, providing them with all the services needed in the and every service should be reachable within a range of short walk. In Italy, we talk of 15 minutes walk. In order to make them autonomous, a kind of district autarky. Okay, to close and to introduce the panelists, some final personal thoughts. From vertical to horizontal, we have to remember that the dilution on the territory of the actual concentration in the cities means the widening of the cementation of Earth's surface. We must remember that to build vertical cities is what allows us to keep Earth's surface more free for forests, parks, and green areas. About the district autarky, we must be very careful in fragmenting big cities in aggregation of autonomous districts as if they were small villages. I think the fascination of big cities is not just of global cities, is not just due to good job perspective, but to their many intangibles and their integration. So it's easy to think of New York, Paris, London, Singapore, Milan too, and Berlin, and so on, Barcelona. In my opinion, what is important is not to provide the district with all the services, but to conceive districts, buildings, and houses provided of all the services useful to improve the health, the well-being, and the comfort of the inhabitants. Well, I think that these last 2 months of lockdown have been a period of massive training for all of us about techniques and the procedures for decent working. I think that what is at hand now is a drastic reduction of travels for working reasons, even the short trip home to work and back. I'm convinced that in the medium range, this will generate a material shifting of spaces from offices to residential buildings. And this is an occasion, is a source of potential important savings in terms of energy and consumption of the Earth's surface. And has a potential great effects on the pollution reduction. Finally, how to facilitate the change? Of course, municipalities must create the preconditions and facilitate and speed up the process. And then the operators, both public and private, must provide the right offer to correspond to new needs. Okay, I'm looking forward to listen to our panelists. Thank you, Antonio.
Thank you very much, Luigi. Thanks to Milano for supporting our activities. So now I'll move to Agustín Fernández de Losada. He is director of the Global Cities Program at the CIDOB in Barcelona. So thank you very much, Agustín, for joining us. I'm not going to ask you the situation in Spain because everybody knows it from the news. But let's look beyond the crisis. In your view, how will global cities change in a post-COVID-19 scenario? Please, Agustín.
Okay, thank you, Antonio, and good afternoon. Well, let me say first that for me it's a pleasure to take part in this dialogue and to share the panel with my colleagues, a very interesting group of experts. I'd like to thank you, ISPI, and especially Tuvia Zebi for inviting me. Well, first, let me tell you, I'm sure that we all agree that the COVID crisis has been and will be, above all, an urban crisis that is having and will have a great impact in global cities and in the urban world. Cities like New York, Milano, London, Melbourne, Seoul, Barcelona, cities all over the world are in the front line trying to define measures to contain the virus and to mitigate the impact. But cities also around the world are now also trying to boosting strategies to restart, looking how to restart the economy, trying to manage the social crisis that is coming, working with the most vulnerable, and also keeping the climate commitments forward. I think this is happening in a context where national governments are defining the rules. National governments are providing the framework, rarely or with few exceptions in cooperation with local governments, sometimes imposing top-down approaches without considering local context and realities. So based in our research on how global cities are facing the crisis, and especially how global cities we think are going to face that emergency, that crisis that will come, that will arise after the health emergency goes a little bit down. I would like to highlight five main or to introduce five main considerations into the debate, five topics or things or considerations that I think are fundamental. First, to address this new normality that will come, and to address the crisis that will come, cities cannot cannot do it alone. Therefore, in my opinion, multi-level coordination matters. It's a must and will be key. If we analyze the most successful countries in the world in the management of the crisis, we will see that most of them are very decentralized countries. And I would pose the case of Germany, for example. Countries where national governments rely in state and in cities, they work in a loyalty framework. National governments, countries where national governments have been able to define cooperative frameworks to avoid hierarchical approaches and to support cities. And this is my second point. We need to reinforce cities. We need to reinforce their capacities to operate, to address the crisis that is coming, that is emerging, and to address this new normality, which will bring very deep structural changes. If we agree that cities are in the front line, providing responses to the most pressing needs of citizens, companies, civil society, if we agree that public investment will be key, and if we are aware that we are in a scenario where cities' revenues will drop dramatically, and I give you the case of Barcelona, this year revenues will drop around 10% according to the approved budget. That means 300 million, between 200 and 300 million euros only this year.
That's why, if I may interrupt, I mean,
sure.
One point that talking about Barcelona and Catalonia in particular, of course, we cannot avoid, which is the very difficult relation with Madrid, with the state. Do you think that also COVID-19 may impact this very difficult relation with the central government?
Well, I think, but if I go through this way, I'm moving to another dimension, not focusing on global cities, but yes, the decentralized model in Spain is somehow under a threat, and let's see this bad relationship between Catalonia and Madrid and the central government. But it is also the case with other regions in Spain, in north with the Basque Country, is providing more complexity to this scenario. Well, that's why I insist multi-level governance, the coordination, collaboration schemes between the different levels of administrations is fundamental, because the central government is managing certain competences that will be key for cities to address the emergency and to address this new normality. And this new normality will be impossible without cities. Cities will have a fundamental role. So I insist being able to move towards more collaborative governance structures is key. And in this point, I would insist, going back to global cities, if you allow me, I would insist that cities will face, I'm sure here in Europe, but I'm sure that it's the same in the US, an opportunity. This crisis gives cities an opportunity to introduce systemic changes. We will be in front of the opportunity to rethink the way we understand and we want the city, the way we draw the city, building new centralities. Those days we have read a lot about this Paris 15-minute neighborhoods. Here in Barcelona, we have the super blocks. We will have to go through a redefinition of mobility, of the use of the public space. For us, I'm sure, and Penny will explain it, for New York and for Paris, Amsterdam, for many cities, the fall of tourism will be dramatic, will be very difficult to manage. But this will be an opportunity to redefine new models of tourism and to go back to local commerce.
Agustin, please. Please, 1 minute. Yes, please.
I thought you were asking me something.
1 minute, if you can hear me. You have 1 minute.
Okay. So I would also introduce here the digital transition or the digital divide. So cities are going to face a great opportunity while facing these very complex moments. Will face a great opportunity to face those systemic changes, and therefore being empowered and having the sufficient capacities to address those challenges is key. And in this field, and with this I will finish, city-to-city cooperation and city diplomacy is playing a crucial role. Cities have been in these 2 months changing and exchanging the measures they have been taking to overcome the outbreak, but they are also exchanging on the strategies they are defining to manage the crisis. Here, city networks play a crucial role, and city diplomacy will also help cities to advocate at the UN, at the European, before the European institutions, to make international responses be more aligned with urban needs. And I think this is also key. Some weeks ago, the mayors of Amsterdam, Barcelona, Milan, Paris, they signed a joint letter asking the EU to give a direct access to the EU funds for cities. So, in my opinion, this type of city diplomacy strategies will continue to be key to manage the new normality that will come. So, in this framework, knowledge exchange and city-to-city will be fundamental. So I let it here. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Agustin, but of course we'll get back to you. But now I turn to Tony Pipa. Tony is Senior Fellow of the Global Economy and Development Program at the Brookings Institution in the US. Tony, you have been directly involved in cities recovery operations in your career. For instance, after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. So my first question to you is, why is COVID-19 different? If it is different, to what extent it is? And then moving beyond the emergency, because the first is strictly an emergency, but moving beyond the emergency, what are the lessons learned from for a more sustainable development? Please.
Yes, well, thank you. Again, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be involved in this conversation and really look forward to this particular dialogue. And thanks for thinking about and asking about, you know, the experience some 15 years ago now after Hurricane Katrina. And I think what's different about this is in the past experience I've had in an emergency or a disaster like that, there's a definition to it. There's one particular event. In the case of Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita, which came directly afterwards, there were physical dimensions. And so you could see it, and it was actually also defined as just a set of locations or a defined geography within the entire country. And so you actually had the attention of the country fixated on the disaster that happened in that one particular place, which actually allowed you to leverage political attention, resources, partnerships, really an all hands on deck kind of response focused just on those that were affected in that particular area. You know, COVID knows no boundaries. And so this is affecting everyone everywhere, and ensuring that everyone has to be safe so that we're managing the contagion in our own locations, I think, you know, is very different. And it also requires us to think about working together and a style of leadership that is both local and collective at the same time. To Augustine's point around city diplomacy and the cooperation that's happening across cities. I think the other thing that I would say is, you know, there's a bit of a psychological, there's a physical difference of just people interacting with each other. So when you were responding in a disaster like post-Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, actually one of the things we did consciously was to bring people together, was to actually get groups together to interact on a regular basis. People could actually physically work together to do cleanup or to actually start to rebuild. Rebuilding, in effect, was a physical thing. But even policy implementation and ideas, civic participation. I used to call New Orleans the most civically active city in America post-Hurricane Katrina, because the people who were living there were very active in pretty much everything that was happening in their community. They were seeing each other a lot. They were talking together a lot. And the physical distancing that we are having to practice to be able to manage the COVID coronavirus is, I think, creates a little bit of a much bigger psychological difference. And in fact, makes it more difficult to bridge, I think, differences of class, differences of neighborhood, differences of status than it might in like the post-hurricane setting that we had in New Orleans. Having said that, I think there are real opportunities for advancing sustainable development that are similar, actually, coming out of those types of particular disasters. One, which Augustine already mentioned, is that it provides an opportunity to have a new conversation about social ambitions, about environmental ambitions, about policy responses. In New Orleans, you actually had a very underperforming educational system, for example, that was stuck for years, for potentially even decades before the hurricane. And the crisis actually provided the opportunity to completely rethink what that educational system could look like. Public housing and same thing. And I think one note of caution I would say, and one opportunity for sustainable development, is the importance of community and citizen participation and partnership participation as we actually take advantage of those policy opportunities. New Orleans actually went through 3 different planning processes before they got one that stuck and didn't sort of politically blow up and achieve the political support to be able to take on what the new normal would look like and what New Orleans would look like anew as it moved forward. And that was because of great participation by experts, some of whom were from all over the world and not necessarily even steeped in New Orleans, but didn't actually have the buy-in and the participation of the citizens themselves. And so I think as we look at the opportunities for sustainable development, one of the things that both COVID and I think the disaster in Louisiana and Mississippi really laid bare the impact on those who are most vulnerable, those who were vulnerable workers in the economy, those who didn't have a lot of agency and opportunity. And I think it's really important, and the important opportunity for sustainable development is to be thinking about how we ensure that as we create reopening and recovery post-COVID, that those communities, those groups of people, and those neighborhoods will actually benefit from the recovery and the policies that we put together. And it's important for them to be participating in the conversation. And I think that really speaks to the necessity for global cities to open their model of governance as they move forward off of COVID. To see it, the city as a platform, really, it's not just city government and city government leadership that will be important for the success of sustainable development post-COVID. It will really be all different sectors in the city. It will be the private sector. It will be civil society. It will be philanthropy. It will be universities. And it will be the city as a place, a city government and city leadership as a place of coordinating and enhancing the collaboration and contributions of all those different sectors on a set of priorities that can enable the city to come back and enable cities to thrive and the neighborhoods and people within them to thrive afterwards.
Thank you very much, Tony. We'll get back to you as well. Now, let's move to Penny Biwardina. Thank you, Penny, for joining us. Penny is New York City's Commissioner for International Affairs. And Penny, we all know that the situation in New York City is really bad, actually, with thousands of people losing their life, and with 500,000 people who lost their job or are about to lose their job. So my first question to you is, first of all, what are the specific measures that a truly global city like New York City can provide to its citizens, especially in a context in which the central government, euphemistically, is not helping? Okay, to be very, very kind. Okay,
so that was very diplomatic.
Yeah, I'm doing my best to be diplomatic, but I could be more. I could speak more bluntly, but I'll try to be very diplomatic. I will stick to my role. So, in a situation like this, I mean, what are exactly the measures that a city level government can provide to its citizens, of what you are doing, of course, in your city? Please.
Of course. Thank you so much to ISPI for inviting me to join today. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. So New York City is still the epicenter in the U.S. For COVID-19. Just to give you some dates, we went into pause, which is shelter in place, on March 20th. So we have been at this for quite a while. Our numbers are still not great. New York City is really challenged in terms of not only dealing with the unemployment, but quite honestly, serving our community right now. So we have created a number of field hospitals in Central Park, at the Javits Center. As we're seeing our numbers decrease, we're also focused on our recovery and reopening strategy. something that I think that has been really important, and to the question that you asked, local leadership in the U.S. on this issue has been extraordinary, not only at the mayoral level, but also at the governor level. And, something that's been important and related to the question that you asked, you've seen regional cooperation amongst governors, which has been very important, right? The first couple of weeks of this, especially around procurement, around PPE and ventilators, was absolute chaos because the federal government had abdicated its responsibility in that role. And you saw the governor of I think it's Washington State or Oregon that sent us ventilators when we were in a time of need. We're seeing healthcare professionals flying in from all over the country to support us. I personally have been procuring in-kind donations from foreign governments who have been actively supporting us with PPE donations. So that moment of crisis, we are slowly starting to get out of. We are really focused right now on how we are doing contact tracing and testing. And again, that is where the federal government is not actively supporting us. And so we as cities and states are leading that work on our own. And so this, I think, really speaks to, the ability for the city to be part of larger networks, right? So the mayor announced last week that we are signing on to the C40 principles for sustainable recovery. Mayor Garcetti has convened over 45 mayors from around the world. Actually, Tony and our colleague, the deputy mayor of international affairs, Nina Hashigian, wrote a great piece in Foreign Policy about the way that global cities are collaborating. Because right now, and this is something that we've been doing for years, right? So after the Trump administration pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, New York City was the first city to sign directly to it. We now have hundreds of U.S. cities that have committed directly to it. New York City worked with global cities around the Global Compact on Migration at the UN to ensure that city voices were heard during that negotiation. So we're just building on that cooperation. And what we have been doing in New York City for the last few years is using the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, as a framework, as a common language from which we can exchange best practices and connect with other cities and states. We created what's called...
Sorry to interrupt, Betty, but in your view, the COVID-19, will make it easier to achieve the SDGs, or will make...
Well, what COVID-19 has done is highlight the importance of every issue in the SDGs. Personally here in New York City, the mayor put me on a reopening task force, really focused on addressing the racial injustice and equities, right? The numbers here in New York City, just in our 5 boroughs, of who is getting impacted by COVID-19 and who is dying of it are largely brown and black New Yorkers. And so this is something in terms of, environmental injustice, just poverty in the city. COVID-19 is bringing to the top. And what we are looking at is the SDGs, whether it's on gender equity or whether it's on climate action. These have been relevant issues for the last 6 years here in New York City, but being able to use the SDGs as a framework allows us to connect on this COVID-19. Next week, we're actually doing a webinar. We have the head of UN Habitat, we have the mayor of Freetown, a number of different parties from around the world that's coming together to talk about the voluntary local review, this as a movement, and our ability to exchange best practices on this platform. Because right now is not the time to think about what is new. We need to replicate the ideas that are already working to accelerate the impact in our communities. And COVID-19 has allowed us, what it's done is it's just added an urgency to what we knew we needed to do, if that makes sense. And so that, I think, is an opportunity as we are, right now we are still in the health pandemic part of this, right? There's an economic crisis. I'm looking at my colleagues from Milan and Barcelona, but in the US, the taxes have been pushed off until midsummer. Who knows if that's going to be extended, but cities and states are going to go broke very quickly. And so what we are right now prioritizing are 4 things here in New York City. That is the safety, the health of New Yorkers, and ensuring there is enough food to eat and shelter. And, it is coming down to the basics, but while we are focused on the basics, that also gets to what we fundamentally need to address as a society, right? And so this is where the opportunity to both use the SDGs, use these global coalitions of of cities and states that are connecting to push forward, multilateral engagement, global cooperation. We're seeing in the U.S. how we can do that, and so we're continuing to believe in that and invest our resources where we can.
Sorry to interrupt you again, but
No, please.
because there is one point that you stressed which is really important to me. I mean, of course, now we are very much focused on the emergency, on the health issue, and so on. But there is one problem which will be there just next year or in a couple of years, which is debt. I mean, many cities will go bankrupt or will risk going bankrupt. So, what are you envisaging for this kind of prospect?
We are in the process, of making that plan. We have a number of different task force that are coming. So, while we're in the health pandemic, we have to get ready for our reopening phase and how we're going to be dealing with our small businesses, larger corporations, tourism. So all the challenges that made us the hotspot, mass transit, tourism, and our density will be what is going to be really difficult about us opening up. So it's rethinking the way that New York City has functioned for decades, right? For the first time, the MTA closed for 4 or 5 hours every night to completely disinfect the subway system. That hasn't happened ever, as far as I know, because the whole point of the subway system is that it runs 24 hours and it keeps the city alive. So we're doing that this summer. We're looking to open up 100 miles of city streets. This is a new way of thinking about the way businesses and communities interact with each other. So everything has to be reimagined. And it can be reimagined in a way that helps our climate, that addresses inequities in our neighborhoods. And so what we are hoping to do in New York City, and these are the conversations we're having with our counterparts, is we're in this situation. So how do we build back better? How do we take this horrible situation that we're in and actually use it as an opportunity to come out of this stronger than we were before, especially for those that are the weakest and most vulnerable in our communities?
Thank you very much, Penny. So now we move to our expert, EC expert of global cities, Tuvia. So Tuvia, now we are slightly moving beyond the emergency in our analysis. So let's try to just point out what could be the major evolutions for global cities after the COVID-19 emergency. Please, Tuvia.
So first of all, let me thank my colleagues and friends all over the world, because really, the discussion has been very interesting until now, and it's a pleasure to see them all. Second point, I want to say that we had a debate with Antonio in the past days whether the right title was where the battle can be fought or where the battle can be won. And this, I think, it's a good question, because we are all agreeing that cities and urban centers are the real epicenter of this crisis, of this emergency. But we still don't know whether the challenge can be won or just fought. So I believe that, and according to the previous interventions, I believe that there are three major challenges we need to focus on. The first one is how to move forward with the ecological transition. The second one is how to reduce social inequalities. And the third one is how to empower citizens. So talking about the environment, we will probably have reduction in urban fluxes thanks to smart working. And this is, of course, a great opportunity to decrease pollution and foster sustainable trends such as electric mobility. On the contrary, we know that public transportation will be under pressure because of social distancing, and this could lead to a massive usage of private cars. So we don't know what the perspective will be, but we know that we need to reduce pollution and improve the quality of air. And we know that, COVID-19 could be an opportunity or a problem itself. So this is the first question mark we need to raise. Second point is about the reduction of social inequalities. I'm sure that Penny read it yesterday, but there was an impressive inquiry in the New York Times yesterday, so about the disequalities in American cities. So we can say that the virus and COVID-19 is more democratic in a way than other disasters, and Tony was talking about that. We know that, for example, hotbeds like retirement homes and jails might be dangerous for everybody, and that's why we need to heal cities in a way as we do with human beings. And in order to be healthy, and Penny was talking about that, cities cannot be separated with red lines and zoning and invisible social borders. What is important to understand is that the virus doesn't ask for a pass or even for a bus ticket. And so in this way, we need to take COVID-19 as a great opportunity for all of us to rethink our cities and put urban poverty, as established, by the way, in SDG number 1, as primary challenge to tackle. So we need to understand that a healthy and well-being city is not just about hospitals and poverty, it's also about soul in a way. And that's why it's very important for public actors to protect also traditional streets and shops and, you know, specific professions and events and places like, for example, libraries and schools. So second point is reduce inequalities and guarantee a soul for cities, and of course taking care of vulnerable people, areas and professions. And this is not a matter of being generous, it's a matter of looking forward. And then the third point, and I think that Agustin was mentioning it briefly, is that we live in a digital era. So each one of us, and we're approved in this moment, has learned in the past 2 months that so many things are possible just, you know, lying on the sofa and being connected. We learned so many things about that, like delivering, working, meeting, and chatting. And although I still hope that we will not renounce to, you know, a dinner outside or a beer with friends, there is a bigger question arising after this revolution. And the question is, in a way, who's the power belonging to? So many important authors have written about the surveillance era, Shoshana Zuboff and Yuval Harari, just to mention two of them, and I think that we wrote about them in a recent publication we did at ISPI. So COVID-19 poses a crucial challenge, since we need to get people data to test them and then trace and treat them, as Penny was saying. So there are different models through this. More freedom or more surveillance? Central powers or smart, responsible, and empowered citizens? We need to understand that this is a huge issue, and cities were already dealing with these questions before coronavirus. I'm thinking of Barcelona and Amsterdam, for example, which were experimenting open data platforms and shared forms or data management and analysis. So to conclude, Antonio, the first intervention is, you know, smart cities are big concentrations of data, but in a way, they need to remain also public spaces where democracy and politics can be implemented. That's why, and I conclude with this image, I believe that one of the most powerful images of this lockdown in the whole world was that of Rabin Square in Tel Aviv, with thousands of people demonstrating against the government while keeping social distancing. In a way, this is a symbol of the challenge we have forward. We know that COVID-19 poses big problems and big challenges. We need to find a way how to transform all these challenges in an opportunity and in a way to move forward towards a sustainable world, of course, and sustainable cities, but I mean, ecologic cities, smart citizens, and of course, more just cities.
Thank you very much, Tuvia. So as promised, now we open the Q&A session. I have some questions here. One is from Paolo Vincenzo Genovese, who is interested in the way the Chinese cities manage the situation. He would like to have your opinion about the specific management of the COVID-19 emergency in China. I don't know who I could, you know, give this question to. So I leave it to you if you know some details about the specific Chinese management at the city level. Nobody is raising the hand.
But
okay, Tony, please. Please, Tony.
Hi, sorry. So one thing I guess I would say, and I agree with Tuvia about the challenges that he laid out around sort of advancing ecologically, also reducing social inequality and empowering citizens. But I think the point there is that we have to be intentional about these. These things just will not happen. And in fact, we could go the other way. And I think what's interesting about the Chinese about the Chinese response, and I don't know the details of it, but they have been trying to ensure that it is a public response. Everyone gets access to the masks and to testing and to the things that are necessary to be able to manage the virus. You can imagine in some situations where, rather than reducing social inequality, COVID actually worsens it, because people who have resources have the ability to be safe, to create enclaves, they take care of their own. And that's the way political and policy decision making happens. I think all of us here hope that that's not the case. And in fact, we're trying to ensure that there's a conversation that addresses the vulnerabilities that cities showed pre-COVID, which are been laid bare, I think, by the virus. But I think, and especially to Penny's point about the difficulty that cities will find themselves in financially and around those financial resources, we have to be sober about how we ensure that the conversations we're having about allocations of resources take those most vulnerable into account, protect all neighborhoods rather than just some neighborhoods, and that this doesn't become something that actually worsens inequalities or creates winners and losers in different parts of a city, and those who have the means to be able to actually feel safe and care for their families and care for their networks.
Thank you very much, Tony. There is another question that I would like to make to maybe Tony himself and Penny, which is, what are the priorities for you after COVID-19 in terms of sustainable development? So if you have to, list 2-3 priorities, what comes first for sustainable development? So first Penny, then again Tony. Of course, if you want to intervene, please.
I'm not going to choose the SDG favorites right now, largely because it is hard to see the city right now outside of the 4 priority areas the mayor has identified, which includes safety, health, access to food, and shelter. And our ability to deliver those in a thoughtful, meaningful way that is also addressing the inequalities that a lot of us have talked about right now, that is going to be work that is going to be referenced in numerous SDGs, right? And so that is the job of my office and our engagement with the UN and the international community to help take those policies that fall into those 4 areas and align them with the SDGs. And so it's hard for me, to take out, in those 4 things that I mentioned, climate action isn't in there. But climate action in this city is deeply ingrained in how we're going to approach those 4 areas. And so I think that's the important point here about the Sustainable Development Goals, is that there are so many targets within just one SDG. You have to look at the policies and the priorities and the values of what you're doing in your own community and make those connections, because it isn't 1, 2, or 3, it's all 17, including the partnerships and the collaboration, including peaceful institutions, right? And so I just think it's important that we don't try to say which of the 17 is the most important, and recognize that looking at the priorities for your community, the way you approach it is how you connect with the SDGs.
Thank you, Penny. I think that our viewer will appreciate your answer. Tony, Agustin, you want to add something on this?
Yeah. Let me just say that I agree with Penny in that I don't think it makes sense to actually pick favorites. And in fact, I think success on sustainable development and success on the Sustainable Development Goals requires a mindset shift. It requires the ability to be thinking of 3 in 1 with each policy that you undertake. So you are looking at the social and human development aspects of your policy, but you're also looking at the economic aspects of your policy and the ecological and environmental aspects of your policy. So the ability to look at policies and your interventions in a way that can solve multiple problems at once and be sensitive to the interaction and interdependence. Look at what health has meant to our economy. To be thinking along those lines, I think, is what the priority for sustainable development is going to be right now. And you're going to be doing it in a financially austere environment. And so you really have to require that you maximize the impact on all those different dimensions for each dollar that you're going to spend and each public service that you put forward and each partnership that you're going to develop.
Thank you very much. So now I move to, I would say there is a very, you can answer on this, but there is a very specific question for you coming from Elena Fattorelli. Which role will play Spanish Ciudades Refugio? I'm not sure to know what they are, and European solidarity. So this is the specific question to you.
Okay. Well, let me first go a little bit through the 2030 agenda, which I think it's also key to address this emergency. First, well, I think the 2030 agenda provides a fantastic political framework to address the crisis. It addresses sustainable development through this integral perspective, and I think this is very relevant. So tackling economic recovery, having social and climate emergency in the front line in mind. So I think it's crucial, and it provides also a great opportunity to improve the way we make policies, we build policies, the policy making process, and I think this is very relevant. So addressing policies from an integral perspective, building collaborative frameworks, so the building policies with stakeholders, with the different levels of governments, etc. Having data and information, using data and information to build informed policies. So I think it's relevant. Concerning the concrete question, and I think there's a link here. Ciudades Refugio, those cities that have been operating there's something similar that sanctuary cities in the US or welcoming cities in other parts of in the UK and other parts of the world. There is something interesting in those cities that they work together. They work in a network. So the idea of city diplomacy for these cities is crucial. They exchange. They advocate together to promote human rights, etc. So they built also alliances with civil society. So Ciudades Refugio, they work with civil society organizations that are working in the sea to protect migrants that are coming and entering Europe. And they advocate politically vis-a-vis national governments. Here, sanctuary cities is very interesting in the US, but Italian cities confronting Salvini's Ministry of Interior were also very interesting. Or here in Spain, Ciudades Refugio, trying the EU, making the EU have highlighting the role of cities in the management of the refugee crisis, refugee emergency. So I think this idea of working together, building networks, building alliances, and through this improving the way we produce policies and we intervene and we define priorities is key.
Thank you very much. Tuvia, on the same issue.
Yes, actually, I would like to add the two small things according to the question. So the first one is that I really believe that European cities might play an important role in this phase. Just before the COVID-19, the European Union has released this big, green investment, Green Deal agreement about, the transition and about the social inclusion. So I believe that because of the structures of European cities and also because of the European atmosphere in this moment, cities could really play an important role in, pushing European institutions and governments to, develop in the right way. In this respect, I perfectly agree with Agustin, and I believe that we should all, try to take part into this process, because we really need to influence in a way our public opinions. And the second question was about the Chinese cities. I'm not an expert, although with ISPI we can make this kind of small teaser. We're gonna make a research on this in the upcoming weeks about Chinese and Southeastern Asian cities. But I read a few papers which are very interesting to me, because talking about China, we always underline the fact that, of course, there is a very, very big central political power, and of course, the People's Party, and this is all true, of course, and there is a big issue of democracy, and now in Italy we have a big issue about the relationship with China, but this is very wide topic. The interesting part is that I read, and I'm trying to study, that there is a very, very big grassroots organization and a big grassroots empowerment structure, where citizens are in a way organized, because of political reasons, of course, but they're all organized into small communities, small clusters, small neighborhoods, small basements, groups. And this was very important in Asian city, apparently, to fight the virus. And of course, this is probably something where we in the Western cities have something to learn from that experience, because we are more conceiving cities as the places of loneliness, in a way, where you need to to affirm yourself, your career, and this is probably something that does not go along very well with this challenge we have now, because in this challenge we have learned, and this is very rhetorical, but it's also true, that we cannot win on our own. We need other people to win this battle, and we're saying at the beginning. And in this respect, probably we need to be more aware of what is happening in Asian cities. I'm not talking just about Chinese, talking about Korean, talking about Singapore, so many other places where probably, maybe because of other reasons, but this issue of organizing civil societies into smaller clusters is working to fight coronavirus.
Thank you, Tuvia. We just have 5 minutes left. So I have one question for all of you. I will ask you to answer very, very quickly. We are moving in a situation in which at the international level, each state will tend towards a sort of inward-looking attitude and stance, while internally states will try to centralize power, because, of course, they also have the excuse that they have to do so in order to better, answer, to provide better answer and measures in face of an emergency. So we have at the international level, inward-looking attitudes by states, and at the state level, centralization, which could emerge. So if this is going to be the situation, the case, what is the future for cities? So we start the other way around. So we start again with Agustin, and then Tony, Penny, and Tuvia. Please.
Well, this is a very pertinent question, and something that is really challenging. And we are seeing this tension. I was mentioned, and I think Penny explained it very well, how in the US there is a confrontation between the federal government and big cities and certain states. But in Brazil it's happening the same, in India it's happening the same, and in Europe, if you analyze...
In Italy as well.
In Italy as well, and in Europe, if you analyze certain realities, there's this recentralization spirit in certain national governments. But I think for cities, being open and working and building in a collaborative perspective will be critical. So to address the challenges they have, city-to-city cooperation, city diplomacy will be fundamental. And I think, and they are showing it, and I think they will continue working in the framework of this international movement.
Thank you. Tony, please.
Yeah, I agree. I think you see in the U.S., and Penny will speak to this directly, but you see cities in the U.S. Banding together, cooperating, U.S. to U.S. city. But as she mentioned, I call it the COVID-19 paradox. So this is a global phenomenon, which is really what we built, the multilateral system. These are the kinds of threats and the kinds of things that we built the international order to protect us against, and yet the traditional multilateral system of nation states has really had quite a weak response, I think, to this. And it has been paradoxically the local leaders who are showing what global cooperation means, I think, in this particular context, and the power of global cooperation. I don't think that's going to change overnight, but I would hope that the global cooperation that cities and city leaders are engaging in can, in some respects, start to affect the global cooperation that is lacking amongst nation states, so that we, as a global community, can get a better handle on the crisis.
Thank you very much, Tony. Penny?
Yeah, I think we need to juggle both at the same time. So in the US, with the Trump administration, I gave the example of the Paris Climate Accord, right? So that was a city and state leadership effort that we built over the last 5 years. COVID-19 has just reaffirmed the importance of the city to city and city to state cooperation. But, you know, with the voluntary local review, and I'm really excited to share that the governor of the state of Pará in Brazil signed on to the voluntary local review. We have now hundreds of local governments that are part of the voluntary local review. And what's important is to keep that coalition and to ensure that we are talking amongst ourselves in terms of subnational leadership, but we also can't alienate national governments that do want to work with their cities and local regions, right? It can't be us versus them. We have to be able to work with everyone that wants to participate in this multilateral system, who want to accelerate impact in their communities. And so I'm excited about the opportunity for us to continue to drive this subnational leadership agenda, but I think it's very important that we are aware of the politics of what's happening. People need to vote. We need to put people in power who believe in global cooperation. And how do we continue to build that city-to-city cooperation, but then also extend that into partnerships with national governments where they want to have them? I think it's that collective sort of movement building that is going to impact the issues that are related to the SDGs.
Thank you very much, Penny. Thank you for highlighting the importance of voluntary local reviews, and I know that you're playing a big role in that. So, Tuvia, just we have just a few seconds, so please. No, we cannot hear you. The mic.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, again, Tuvia, the mic.
No, now I'm not mute anymore.
Okay, now it's fine.
Okay.
Right.
So basically, talking about local experience we did in Italy, we can say that there are many things which can be managed better at the local level, and other things which shouldn't be managed at the local level. We need to be very sober in this field, I think. So I think that if we hope that, thanks to COVID-19, we're going to have a reshaping, a rethinking of our administrative structure, we need to think that, there are, in a very, very easy way, things which would be better managed at a local level. I'm talking about emergencies and healthcare and some other things. And there are other things which are crazy, in my opinion, that we are actually listening to every day in the television. It's crazy that every mayor of a small town actually decides, just because, he wakes up this way to forbid something or to close something else. So basically, I think that we need to understand that cities play a crucial role. Of course, cooperating with other layers. If we think that we can have a sort of a battle among different layers of responsibilities, we're going to just gain a huge mess in managing emergency and not emergencies.
Thank you very much, Tobias. So now time is over. I will continue with you this interesting exchange of views, but we have to stop now. So thank you very much indeed to all of you for your interesting contribution to today's webinar. So, of course, to all our viewers, I hope I see you again in our next webinar. Thank you very much indeed, and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.